Hey everyone, my name is Nika Nour. I'm the Executive Director for the International Game Developers Association Foundation. I am currently based in the United States, and as you can see, a really big Batman fan. I've got all these collectibles and stuff. I don't know, maybe I'll break down the fourth wall at some point or send pictures or post them or tweet them so you can see. But I am absolutely delighted to be here today. And thank you so much to the conference organizers for having me. Comic books have absolutely been a huge part of my life. I've grown up absolutely, loving video games, breaking down the stigma of, being a female presenting nerd who absolutely loves games in a household that I grew up in where I wasn't allowed to play them at all. My story even dates back to um, circumventing, the parental standards in my house. I would walk dogs for cash money and then go to a Best Buy and buy my video games and equipment by taking a bus, and they wouldn't even know where I am, which I absolutely don't recommend in today's world. If anyone under 18 is watching this, don't sneak off on buses to buy video games. There's digital downloads in the internet now, so it's a lot easier. But I'm really excited to kind of talk a little bit about the foundation. We focus specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's world, which we know is absolutely loaded. We know that people are starting to have real conversations about race, about sexism, about harassment in the workplace, but not even just about, how it affects us at work, but how it affects us even just trying to get a job or trying to break in the industry. It's been years. It's been years where we've been talking about trying to figure out how we create a more equitable standard for people. And it doesn't make sense. Games don't discriminate, right? Other than, making sure that our games are accessible for everyone. Anyone can pick, at the end of the day, most people can pick up a controller at any part of the world and play. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you're born. All that really matters is, are you physically able to play, and do you have the tools and equipment to do so? So it doesn't make sense. Why are we facing such, you know, bizarre issues and toxicity when it comes to gender, when it comes to race, when it comes to creed, when it comes to, your sexuality? And it's a real problem. It's not an easy conversation because everybody comes to us and they're just like, oh, I have this diversity problem, how do I solve for it? I'll be honest. It takes generations to make a change. It takes generations to break down social constructs that are really tagged in from a really young age. There's also cultural constructs that come in. I don't want to be North American or US centric. Various regions of the world, we're still dealing with what it means to be gender equitable, what it means to just treat people how they want to be treated. And and so people are always wondering, how do we move? How do we melt this giant iceberg that we keep heading towards and crashing in? And for me personally, I believe in just chipping away at a rock. If you try to go and boil an ocean, you'll just drive yourself absolutely mad. There's a global pandemic going on. There's a crisis. There's politics, and um, I've been at this for, gosh, about over a decade now, and not even just focusing on diversity. Diversity is a job that nobody really grows up saying, this is what I'm going to do. It's actually a position that if you are a young, woman of color with a bit of a mouth, it kind of ends up being bestowed upon you because your bosses don't really want to deal with it. It just makes sense. So I've really had to educate myself on what it means, because sometimes the the torch that gets passed to you, it gets handed to you whether you like it or not, in an office of all white men trying to solve diverse problems. And that's why I went to the IGDA Foundation, to really solve for this in more of a full-time capacity. Because if people keep handing over this torch and how to solve for it, you end up just being like, all right, well, if we're going to do this, let's do this correctly. And so what does it mean to chip away at diversity, equity, and inclusion? For us, it's really simple. I like tangible results. I like to see a beginning, middle, and end, because when you get into these conversations, you can end up circling the drain and it becomes exhaustive. People want solutions, people want actions. But the truth is, the change that is most helpful is the change you can't see, right? It's getting people to look at their own values, look at their own behaviors, look at their own interactions and language with one another. And so for us, the solutions that we present, as we work with corporate partners and companies, right? Because at the end of the day, it takes resources. And we work with companies, and we usually fly people from around the world, from marginalized backgrounds and communities, to the Game Developers Conference. And we put them through a whole boot camp and training. Students that are minorities. We have a Velocity program, which is for women and non-binary or marginalized genders who are looking for their first job, or they've been in the industry, they had a shit time, and they're thinking about coming back. And then we also have next gen leaders, people that are mid-career, years 3 through 7, trying to get promoted, trying to get their pay to scale to their actual experiences. We're a group of awesome nerds. Not everyone is born with not everyone's going through the soft skills, the communication, standing up for yourself, being able to actually determine what your value is, working through imposter syndrome. And these are the things that you subjectively can't see, but we usually bring people in physically. And this year we went virtual because, we shouldn't put careers and goals on hold during a pandemic. I know people are saying, but Nika, like, how are you gonna figure it out with this online thing? I mean, now we're a couple months later, people are figuring it out. I think remote work is going to be here to stay. And networking in person and finding those jobs is critical. But if you think about it, for people, especially marginalized genders, women and non-binary, there are actually opportunities that come with virtual. When you go to a conference, you're not being harassed. When you're at a bar trying to, meet somebody to get a job, you don't have to worry about who's putting what possibly in your drink or monitoring or walking down sketchy alleys. So we've really leaned into opening doors in a virtual space. And we've realized that it's created abundance of opportunities, because instead of supporting people for 1 week on the ground, we have been supporting people in a community for 2 months straight, working with over 250 developers that have come in to share experiences, mentorship, friendship, right, salary negotiations, resume reviews. And that's kind of the momentum that we're staying in. It's because the internet, you lose a lot when you're not in person, but at the same time, we're now accessible to people in over 14 different countries. My sleep schedule has definitely been lacking, and I've probably developed some well-earned dark circles, but they're worth it. They're worth it because I feverishly and fervently believe that in order to create this almost ripple effect of the change you can't see is by continuously propping up the next generation of leaders. Because this fight can be exhausting. You can get tired. It's inevitable that if you don't have your compass, if you don't have your North Star, if you're not asking yourself every week, what does it mean? What does success look like? You will get tired. And so I focus on building up awesome, awesome people. And then if those people have any fight in them, showing them the way, right? Instead of knowing the way, showing them the way to continue to produce change, to continue to help. This year, we've had a lot between another wave of sexual harassment allegations and Black Lives Matter. People are re-recognizing that the playing field has been inequitable for a long time. And, all the feelings that come with that are valid. People get upset, people get angry. What I ask and, what I would implore is that you just don't forget, because my not a fear, but I think what's reasonable is after a period of time, we forget the feelings we had in June or July. We we become a little bit more complicit as we've adapted to our new world. We forget, and there's also nothing wrong with not standing up or not, understanding, because again, it takes time to also really understand. Educate yourselves. Don't just rush out the door and post, etc., to show solidarity. Definitely be involved, but definitely get educated, because that's the best way that you can create change, is to build up the knowledge so that you are building your own personal foundations of what this all means, what diversity, equity, and inclusion means for the long term. Making sure that you are, and this is why I mean, I don't hold back on this stuff. Like, you have to really take a look at yourself. And when people are saying, how do I help? How do I mentor? How do I do whatever? Reaching out to stakeholders like the IGDA Foundation, like some of our friends and partners, and figuring out what the tools are, what the resources are, what the help is really needed. It's always needed in the long term, not in the short term. Not in the short term, I want to help now and then I disappear in 3 months. It's actually those societal pressures of huge spikes of people deciding they suddenly want to help, and then they realize 3 months later, this isn't for me, because it's intense on leaders in the space who spend a lot of time educating, building you up, etc., and then you're gone because we don't see the long-term effects. And that's really, that's really the next step, is pulling together leaders in this space and demonstrating, what does help look like, what does success look like. And unfortunately, success doesn't feel good in the short term. You do things, you say things, you mean well, but you actually don't get that satisfaction, because it isn't an instantaneous thing. You don't level up. It's not a video game where in 15 minutes, you get your broadsword and you upgrade and you get new armor. It doesn't work like that, and especially because you don't really get to physically see it. I think we will have a long road ahead. I'm not confident that this is going to be solved overnight. I've seen waves of this starting back from Gamergate, and we have a whole new generation. For those who aren't aware, we have a whole new generation of game developers who don't even know what Gamergate is anymore. And so I think the one thing that I would say when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion work is reach out to programs, make concerted efforts. If you have $5, donate to the leaders, that really need it to keep their operations going. Mentor. Gosh, people are always looking for mentor, sponsorship, volunteership. And really, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. But when you see people whose ideas are being shut down in the boardroom, when you see voices being silenced because they're either not building those soft skills or they're working through imposter syndrome, support them, ask them. It's a scary thing to do. We all say allyship. We all say allyship means, supporting people that are in the office, but we haven't been in an office for a while. And so it is inevitable that you'll sit there and you want to say something and do something, and for whatever reason, there's a frog in your throat. If you have the ability to support and lean others that, maybe could use an ally in the workspace, in the studio space, etc., that's also equally important. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to punch through walls. I've had to throw all my social construct ideas of what it means to be the minority in the workplace. Like, it is a little bit more grating. It's not as easy, but if you're doing what you love, if you're passionate about what you do, ultimately it does work out in the end. It does work out in the end. And if you are somebody who is a marginalized gender, if you are someone, who is a person of color, and you are new to the industry, it is inevitable that you may face some sort of obstacle. And it's really important to build the tools and the building blocks of resiliency and understanding, and utilizing your intellect to demonstrate what fights are worth it, how to navigate it. And that's really all we're doing now at this point, is how are we navigating this already insane series of circumstances we've all been put under? And how do we relieve those stresses just a little bit to pave the way for the next generation, and for future leaders? And I think that's going to be what's really important right now, because our current leaders are burning out. Thanks so much for having me on this, and I appreciate for letting me talk. If you want to reach out, my Twitter is @Nika, @Nika, and our website is IGDAFoundation.org. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our other panelists on this story, but I definitely would say, even if we're not the right resource for you, we have many partners that can use help as well. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Limpho Moeti. I am the producer and business developer for an indie studio in South Africa called NyamaKop. We make African-inspired games for a global audience, and I'm going to tell you guys a little story about diversity and inclusion, why it's important, and some of my own experiences and feelings as to why this is something we really need to focus on and be better about, particularly on the African continent. So I've been in the industry now for about 4 years. I previously worked at Free Lives, at Playtopia as the Deputy Festival Director, and obviously I'm now with NyamaKop. And I think an important thing to note when we're talking about diversity is that it's not just about having diverse games, but also diverse creators. I think that there is a huge benefit to having diverse people in all parts of your studio. One of the biggest things that it does is that we have to understand that the world is changing, right? So what I mean by that, and this is really just my thesis statement, is that particularly in the indie scene, we're at a point where indie games are very niche, and you have to be very good at marketing yourself to that niche. And one of those niches is, in fact, diverse people. People are hungry for new and interesting stories told from different perspectives. Games are an incredibly powerful tool to getting people to empathize and understand others' experiences, because we're not just watching a story passively, we are actively contributing to the creation of the game whenever we play it. Our decisions change what happened in the game and what we experience within a game. So it's really a great, as someone once referred to it, an empathy machine, which is super vital. And I think that what's very important is we need to change this idea and narrative that anything that isn't white is political, or anything that isn't male is political, and rather start telling stories and just accepting that, like, people of color can be, or women or queer people can just be in a story and sort of exist in that story and tell a story from that perspective. And I think that the best way to do that in a way that is beneficial to both the studio and society at large is by having diverse people involved actively in the process. My experiences have been that, like, even though I live in South Africa, unfortunately, the industry here is incredibly white and male dominated, to the point where one of my running jokes that my creative director alleges I stole from him, but he stole from me, is that there are more white men named Ben than Black women in the South African gaming industry. It's true. I literally work with 2 of them. There are 2 white men named Ben at my current studio. Luckily, it's also a studio that is actively trying to ensure that 90% of the people working at the studio will be people of color. And so far, we have hit that target. While there are 2 white men named Ben, they are also the only white people at the studio. So progress, I guess. One of the stories I want to talk about is just the ways in which unconscious bias can be really harmful to people of color within the industry. I think that in general, the industry in South Africa is generally quite progressive and tries to get people, particularly poor people, into the industry and giving them skills to start making games. But a big thing that is missing is getting contact and getting people who are middle class or higher, who can, fall back on their families and have safety nets, making games, to be a part of the industry. And a big part of that are unconscious biases that end up making it very difficult or make it very uncomfortable for people of color to be involved in the industry. So the story I'm going to tell, which is probably going to get me into trouble, is when I was part of a festival, which name will not be mentioned, and we had just started creating it, and there was going to be a press release given out about this festival. And I literally had to fight to have my name included as one of the organizers of the festival. They felt that simply naming the studio I was working with was enough, and me asking to be named personally was me acting as though I wasn't a part of the studio, even though all I was asking for was to literally be recognized as one of the creators, as you would with any video game at the end when there are credits, and have like the studio in brackets behind me. But while it did eventually happen after a second rewrite the press release, the arguments I got was that the comments I got were that I needed to be very careful, that it seemed unreasonable to be wanted to be named, even though I had been there in the beginning of the process of creating the festival, that, it made it look like I didn't want to be part of the studio I was working for anymore. But with the two other people who were white, it was perfectly acceptable for them to be named and have the companies they were working for put in brackets behind them. And that was just one of the few instances, and it's a small instances overall, like probably like 50 people read that press release. But it was one of those instances that really, as a person of color, and particularly as a woman, made me feel as though my efforts as a part of that festival just weren't taken as seriously, weren't seen as important, and that it was okay to just have my label be done and then have a company that was predominantly owned and associated with a specific person get the credit for my work, which feels very uncomfortable and makes it very difficult to want to actively be involved in the creation of events or in games where you feel like the work that you do will be uncredited, or that the amount of stuff that you've done to help create something will just be dismissed. And I've started to notice that it is a lot of things that other people of color have experienced in this industry as well. And one of those things is that these people are incredible, delightful people, many of whom I'm still friends with, because for them, it wasn't active hate, it wasn't maliciousness. It was just that unconscious bias and expectation of how things would go, of how you value people's work in an industry, and how easy it is to just overlook the work of people of color and of women. And that's a big issue. And the way that you solve that is you have more than just one person of color involved in things. Recently in South Africa, there was this huge brouhaha because a big company released an advert where they referred to black hair as dry and frizzy, as damaged, and I think it was like flat, and white women's hair was seen as normal hair. And the reason that things can happen like that, even if there are people of color, is because if there's only one, you create a situation where that person of color feels othered and alienated, because they consistently have to do the emotional labor of saying, hey, maybe that's racist. Hey, maybe that's problematic. Hey, have you considered not doing it that way? And it starts alienating and isolating that person of color, because then you're seen as the wet blanket. You're seen as the Debbie Downer who's always got something to say, and it's a consistent fight where you eventually feel like you have, and I always joke about this, like 4 chances, you have 4 cards a year to call something out, even if there are 10 terrible things happening. And the way you can prevent that is by having more people of color involved in studios. You have more people of color involved in managerial positions, and you actively do the work to not just get in people who are inexperienced, but to also do the work of finding talented people of color and growing them. It's not that they don't exist or they don't have the skills, they do. It's just a lot of them are not in games because it's a very difficult and tiny industry to break into. And that little bit of growth that you'll have to do to get them into gaming is going to just show you huge amounts of benefits, which is something that the studio I'm currently working for NyamaKop is doing. We are getting in people from various industries, creative industries, who have huge amounts of talent, and we're actively growing them and doing the work to ensure that they can get into games, something they've always wanted to do, and to help tell authentic, diverse stories. I'm jumping around a lot because I'm very unprepared. It is 11 o'clock in the morning and I have so much work. I still go into production, it's rough. But the sort of second thing I want to talk about in terms of like not only having people of color behind the screen or, you know, people of color behind the scenes, but also having representation in games is incredibly powerful. What I'd like to talk about often is particularly for Black people, and obviously if you're another person of color, you can also feel this your way. I'm talking specifically about Black people because that's the experience I have, is the importance of being able to have a power fantasy within games and how powerful it is to see yourself represented not as just in pain or suffering, but as powerful as beautiful. It's why I always sing the praises of Black Panther whenever I can, because it was the first time seeing African creatives or African culture shown as powerful, as futuristic, and not as savage or uncouth. And it was incredibly beautiful. It's beautiful to see a part of your culture represented on the screen as futuristic and incredible. And it makes you feel so good about yourself and reminds you that there is more to your ethnicity than just being a gangster or having been a former slave. Because while we're trying to tell our stories of the present and the past of the Black experience, what it means is that there's just consistently this through line of suffering and pain. And so we start to feel as though what connects us as people of color is the suffering and pain. Whereas what ought to be connecting us is our culture, is our beauty, are the things that we are great at, which society has consistently told us we're not, or that we don't have. And so we're at the studio at NyamaKop trying to actively create a situation where we tell African stories authentically, where we authentically use specific cultures for the characters we want to use, where we actively do the work of researching and showing the characters as a power fantasy so that it's not just this consistent commodification of pain and struggle. Because there's more to Blackness than pain and struggle. There's more to Blackness than the current issues we need to resolve and fix both systemically and individually. But there's also asking the question of where do we want to go? Who do we want to be in the future? What can we be in the future? And showing that so that we can also show the joy, the love, the creativity within our cultures, both on the continent and out of the continent, which I think is vitally important. Whew, finally, I think finally the last thing I want to say is simply that to do this kind of work does take a lot of effort and it does take a lot of work. But that work and that effort, especially if you're in a dominant group, whether that is as a male or straight or cis or white, is that it may feel like a lot of work and you may not be able to see the benefits of it because of all the things that you've already experienced and had in your life. But the benefit you get out of it is multitudinous. There's just so much untapped talent and potential. There are just so many interesting stories and adventures and ideas just waiting for you to really get into that. And it'll fundamentally just add a giant pool of people to collaborate with, to engage with. It'll give you access to such a vast amount of new audiences that it just feels short-sighted to push back against that. And finally, it's just going to create a much more interesting and exciting place to work at and experiences to have. And so really all I can say is do the work. It'll be 100% worth it. That is where our society is going. We are moving towards more diversity and inclusion, not just because it's the right thing to do, although you really should just do it because it's the right thing to do, but also because there's a huge amount of success and potential there. There's a huge new way to be sustainable within a very rocky and difficult industry. And that's why diversity and inclusion is so important. That's why you have to do the work of just keeping in check those unconscious biases and thinking about the ways in which you treat people and how it can affect them so that you're not harming people, whether by accident, which is generally how I feel it goes, because I like to believe the best in people. I have been Limpho Moeti. This has been my 15 minutes of rambling. I hope you get something valuable out of it. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. My name is Choolwe Shabukali. I am from Zambia, Southern Africa. So I am the co-founder and managing director for Team Gematrix. Team Gematrix is the premier esports organization in Zambia. We are the first organization to really start up competitive gaming in terms of having a team that represents our country in various tournaments, both locally and internationally. So my background in terms of gaming is that I started gaming when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I grew up in a family scenario where I was surrounded by a majority of guys growing up. So my cousins introduced me to Mortal Kombat and Tekken, and I was blown away by how cool it was. And I was just so natural with the controller. So, the hype around that from my elder cousins are like, oh, she's so cool, this kid, So I grew up playing like that. And then what I found about the beauty about gaming that really connected me to more people, like more of my friends at school, church, and wherever, was that it really connected a lot of us. Like with gaming, I didn't really feel the difference in social class or race or culture with my friends. I just felt really connected, and we were driven by the mutual desire to succeed, the mutual desire to uplift each other in a common goal, I should say. So that's really what stuck with me through my childhood about gaming, and it's never left me. So come down to about 2018, that's when it was during my university years. I actually went to a friend's house, and then I found them playing the game, playing Mortal Kombat 9 somewhere there, and I was really taken by it, and it really reminded me of how I used to love playing games, because actually I stopped playing games because of high school. I was in boarding school and all that stuff. So after I started that, I reconnected to my passion of gaming, and I became friends with my co-founder, Sole Prince. And after we became friends around that time, I told him that I wanted to create a business that I was, really passionate about, something that could make a difference, but that I could enjoy doing, and make sustainable eventually. So that's how we came up with the idea to do a gaming event, a local gaming event at our local startup incubator called Bongo Hive. So we did this event, and it was more like just a test the market, just understand what type of gamers are there, what games do gamers love to play, how is the community, just to understand for us. So when we did that, we got really great feedback. We advertised it in only 2 weeks, and we got over 100 people participated. So that was good feedback for us for a start. And one thing stuck with me at that event is that I only noticed a handful of girls at the event. So for me, being a girl, it was an issue, but I was like, okay, fine. I'm trying to test the market just to understand what's really happening in my community. And I was like, okay, fine, we can work with this eventually. So going forward, when we decided to pivot into an esports team, we put together great talent that we noticed. And when we started our journey, we won. So we started our journey of the organization in March 2018. By April 8th, we were in Kenya for our first Sub-Saharan Africa major, and we won the championship. And that was mind-blowing, because that was it was a pivotal moment in my life, because I was like, okay, now this dream is validated because it can actually work. I always imagined our organization being at big stages in South Africa, in Europe, in the US, but this was like validation to that actually being a possibility. So we kept going, and ever since that tournament, we've won about over 6 Sub-Saharan Africa tournaments with our players in NetherRealm Studio games like Injustice, Mortal Kombat franchises. So that's been exciting, and we signed our first player from the US, Han Rashid. So he represents our brand in the US pro competition majors. So that's like a brief, explanation of what I do at Team Gematrix. So we also specialize in hosting online tournaments and offline tournaments locally, just to do our contribution to grow our local community and fan base. So in my journey in the esports side of things, when growing the community and fan base, there was a time when I was invited to a tournament. That was in 2019, a local tournament. So when I went to the local tournament, organizer, I asked him, so, okay, what's this tournament really about? Like, okay, no, it's fighting games. I'm like, cool. I see you advertising that you want to have a female-only Tekken tournament. So how's that going to work? And I know only females will be allowed in the Tekken tournament, and the rest will be like just guys and anyone else wants to participate. So when I went to the tournament, I was the third girl at the tournament. So that to me was a bummer, because I've always wanted to have female representation in our organization in terms of the esports players or management. So I was looking at this event as my way into that, my way into networking with ladies who are really active in esports. But seeing only 2 other girls there was kind of a low blow for me. And after that, I was like, okay, this is a problem that really needs to be thought through, really to really sit down and really understand why we are not comfortable with going to events that are like male dominated. So after that, so on social media, people started talking about it. And I noticed one of the players, some guy, was like, girls who go to tournaments just go there to, to look for guys or to just get dates or whatever. They don't really go there because, I don't really want to say exactly what he said because it's very offensive. But let's just say he said things that were very offensive, so offensive that if you were a girl reading that and you wanted to participate in that tournament, you wouldn't ever, ever think of going to a gaming tournament in Zambia. So to me, that was more like a trigger. So I actually talked to the person and they apologized about it, but it didn't solve the real problem as to why. So I talked to a couple of girls eventually, and I've been talking to them for a while in the community. And it seems that there's like fear, like a fear of being included, a fear of representing ourselves in a male-dominated space. So I felt that as well in terms of the business development side when it comes to my gaming aspect. Because first to start off, when I started this organization, I was about 23. So I'll be 23 and I'll be going into like corporate meetings with CEOs and managers and directors, and there would always be that that vibe. Say, what's this kid? What's this young girl? Doing in this, like, what's this young girl doing in my office talking about esports, competitive gaming, and they're the first organization of this kind. Is it a real industry? What can it do? How do we get back our investment? Even though I would explain, like, the reality of how esports would be beneficial in terms of the business side, there was always that at the back of it, say, these kids, talking about gaming. And then it's kind of affected me in terms of me thinking of reaching out to a lot of sponsors locally, like a lot of corporate sponsors to sponsor our team. Because most of the time, you know, people in the community will be like, wait, you guys are champions. You've won tournaments, you know, in Zambia, in Kenya, in South Africa, you've been to Ireland, you've been to America representing, you know, the continent and your country. And how come you don't have like real support like behind you? And you know, so it really kind of like held me back from really putting myself out there more, to the point where there was a time when I was with a friend of mine, we're having some coffee, and he said the same thing to me. And then he was like, okay, so Choolwe, why don't you guys just get a friend of yours who's a guy and is white, and then, you know, have him pitch for you, like you pretend he's a co-founder, you make him a fake co-founder, and then you go into meetings, and people will take you more seriously, and people will take your business more seriously. Because right now, and don't even say you're the owner of the business, because people will be like, what's a young girl going to do, for this? So that way, people in Zambia will take you more seriously in the corporate space. And, you know, when they see people who are more diverse and not female, young, or black, they'll have more, you have more chance at you getting deals. So to me, that was really, you know, coming from a background where you don't see, you don't see people as different in terms of that. You just see people for being people, and you appreciate people for what they can do and what they have to offer. And being taught that was kind of like, wow, this actually happens. You know, it was like, this is actually a real thing. So it really made me realize that it's a conversation that needs to be had a lot, and such a problem cannot be solved just there and then. It's something that needs to be constantly focused on, and constantly be like, you have to really solve it going forward, like fail forward solving it. You can't just say, oh, we'll solve it once with one conference, or, you know, just have all the heads of whoever and just have them in one room and we'll solve the issue. I don't think it can be solved like that. It's really grassrooted. So for me, as that, it's as a pioneer in my country, it's something that I really am actively fighting. It's a problem that I'm actively solving. So in that aspect, when it comes to, you know, female inclusion in my organization, Team Gematrix, and how I can make a difference, the solution that I came up with, I've actually been reaching out to a lot of girls in the community. I haven't really like said, okay, you should only play these games, and, you know, I'm just trying to find out like what games they're comfortable in playing, and creating a secure environment for them to start the foundation of, you know, not feeling left out in terms of what they would love to do in esports, but just, you know, getting that real foundation. So I've seen it with a couple of friends in America. You know, there's this organization called Combo Queens, there's Valkyries, and it should be forgotten the other name, but by Console Gaming League. It's just like female organization teams where they host tournaments that are done by women for women. So that's really what I want to do locally in Zambia, and see if I can solve it locally and then branch out and include other ladies from the other countries in the region to participate in these tournaments online, so that we can create you know, our own niche of a strong bond of sisterhood together, and see how best we can uplift each other and support each other in terms of our love for esports. So that's one of the solutions I'm working on actively right now. At least I've got, you know, a couple of people who want to be on the team and a couple who want to play. So I'm working on that. The other thing I think is it's something that like I said, cultural things, cultural issues, all these issues, inclusion, are things that are embedded into us at a very young age. So one of the things that I am really passionate about starting, especially after this whole COVID thing goes goes away, is starting an electronic sports club in schools in Zambia and reaching out as many schools as possible and promoting a club where girls and guys can play together and not feel the difference. Say, oh, the guys are girls. We play on peace. We play on peaceful, but just really being included. So that's one thing I want to work on, and I'm really passionate about that. And I really hope that as we keep having these conversations across the board because of online, that we can help each other find solutions to, progress in terms of this topic, diversity and inclusion, no matter where we come from. So yeah, I'm also enjoying the other panelists' views and their experiences, but that's my little experience. So I want to thank Comic Con Africa and the rest of the Business Forum for having me on here. It's been a great opportunity to voice my feelings and my experiences. So thank you so much, and please take care during this Corona thing.
Hi everyone, I'm Kish Hirani. I'm CTO of a new startup called Terra Virtua. I'm also a chair of Baymin Games. I'm also a mentor. I'm also a board advisor. I'm a diversity and inclusion advocate, a speaker. I've got multiple hats, but I'll give you a bit more of my background. I've been roughly 24 years in the, no, it is exactly 24 years in the industry last month. Yes. Wow, time flies. I've always been in development roles. So I started off as a programmer and very quickly moved on to becoming technical director and equivalent roles in companies like Acclaim, THQ, Probe Entertainment, if you remember that. And pretty much after that, very much moved onto the publisher side of video games business development, which meant became a lot more hands-off from programming. So that was starting off at BBC Multimedia, where I was a technical manager, and then moved on to THQ, which was again publishing side as external technical director. I had a small stretch at Microsoft. I was a technical evangelist there. And then a good stretch of 8 years at Sony PlayStation as their head of developer services. My position was made redundant there. So after that, I became self-employed, and I've been since self-employed for the last 4 years, which gave me just this tremendous opportunity to give back to the industry. And I'm going to talk a bit more, but that's also led me to becoming the founding chair of Baymin Games. Baymin Games, if you're not aware, it's Black, Asian, minority ethnic. It's UK-centric right now. We will looking at future expanding, but we started that off. So I'm going to go a bit more, start this with Baymin Games, just so you're aware. But before that, I'm just going to say, Jambo Watiote, I was born in Africa. I was born in Kenya. Super proud of that. I moved to Britain when I was a teenager, and then lived in London, which is where I am now for the last 30 years, something like that. Yes. So, and Miss Africa, obviously, just when you're born there, it is the place you want to be. And so, yes, let me get started with Baymin Games a bit more, and then I'll talk about more about me being in the industry and various hats I've played. And we'll take it from there. So Baymin Games was founded 4 years ago. It was a very odd sort of way it was founded, as a lot of things are, very grassroots. So when I was made redundant at Sony, as you would, being made redundant, I packed up my bags and went to Africa. I went to Kenya, my home country, and I started doing charity work. And one of the charity works which I did was I didn't want to go and link up with any organizations. And speaking Swahili fluently, I just thought I need to do, I had a couple of connections. So I went out of capitals as possible. Nairobi, so places like, if you can relate to Nyeri and if it Limburus and places like that, where there's a lot of poverty and a lot of lack of education. So especially for the 4 to 6 year old kids. And there's this wonderful charity I found which gets this young future adults into the mind frame of learning. So this is, I found, a big issue, and especially in Africa, any developing countries or so. When you're in a developed countries, when you're in the capital, you have the privilege for between the age of 2 to the 6. You're watching television, your parents are teaching, you're giving you books, everything else. Or so you're used to, television is also important in the sense you're used to watching a cartoon for half an hour, looking at it, paying attention to something. If you're out on the streets, or I wouldn't call the streets, playing about in the fields, etc. That's your life. That's amazing. But then you put in this class at age 6, which luckily I believe, and I'm pretty certain in Africa is South Africa is the same, and various places in Africa, you are given education at the age of 6. But before that, you aren't. So you jump into this class, and then you're considered the disruptive kid or the person who doesn't know how to learn, or so, because you've never learned. And so it becomes people who have had that privileged life of learning between the age of 4 and 6, paying attention, sitting to somebody, listening to for half an hour, be it television or whatever else, so having books. They don't have access to that. So I started doing that charity work where we went out, and it was a very simple goal. I took my Google Cardboard and I took my phone, and we just showed virtual reality to all these kids. And the whole thing in my head was going on is like, I want one of this kid to say, and this was about 4 years ago, one of this kid, if he goes, or however many, goes out in the tech world, I don't want anybody to tell them that we have been working on VR for the last 20 years or 25 years, because I want that kid to say, yeah, me too. I witnessed VR at the same time as you. So I wanted to give the power of time. That's so valuable, to give somebody the power of time, because nobody else can take that away from you. Anyway, back to UK, and the founder of Women in Games gathered all the ethnic minority in Britain and said, do we need an ethnic minority group in the video games industry? And so quite a few prominent individuals from the video games industry were around the table and said, there isn't one. And there wasn't one. But we weren't aware, because again, when you go into work, you just go into work. You don't choose, hey, today I'm going to be brown in the video games industry, and in this meeting will be about me. No, you go in and design games and work towards with your team or so. And so we formed, and I was very vocal in terms of that if we form an organization, it has to be positive. What's the positive aspect of, and Timpo sort of covered this, and I'm going to amplify that. Diversity brings in creativity. When you want something creative, you need a diverse team, and that's why diversity matters. And that's a very simple business case. It's a no-brainer. Every team needs to be diverse. I said it needs to be that positive, because you're going to lose businesses if you start talking about you have to do this because it's the right thing or so. Great, that will happen for a short term, but you can't sustain that for long term. So I very much focused on the business aspect of it, the large corporation. How do you get all these corporations to say diversity is something you need to invest in your business if you need to survive in the long term? Unfortunately, or fortunately, let's just say, everybody said, this is great, Kish, well volunteered, you need to be the chair of Baby Games. And I said, great, I'll do that for 6 months while we establish, and then we'll see what happens. 4 years on, I'm still the chair of Baby Games. So that's Baby Games. A bit more about Baby Games in particular. It's very UK-centric, as I mentioned earlier, on grassroots organization, all run by volunteers. Our primary activity, which we established ourselves, we made a tremendous difference about 2 years ago, is every month we have a monthly meetup at a video game studio, mostly in and around London, because ethnic minority wise, it's the population. It's very easy, low hanging fruits. You can set up a meeting a day before, and everybody will turn up, will be ethnic minority in the video games industry. When I say everybody, I'm looking at a good 100 people who turn out. Whereas in difficult, if we do it across the UK or so. So that's been incredibly successful. We've been to studios, Media Molecule, name all the studios within London and the Southeast, and we've managed to have meetups there. The whole idea being, we want ethnic minority people who want to get in the video games industry to see places where they could work, they could reach out to, they could see what the studio is about. Let the studios then on the other end tell them how to apply for these roles, the type of people we are looking for, and show their space and show how inclusive they are to attract people to get into the industry. Or if you are in a different company or so joined that company. So that was a very simple idea. I'm going to fast forward to COVID-19, and come mid-March, the world was all hit by COVID-19, although we were hit a lot earlier. But mid-March, everything went into lockdown. All our monthly meetups came to a halt, and which was our most successful initiative within Baymin Games. So we swapped that completely to virtual meets. It had a tremendous impact, a far more positive impact than we expected. One of the goals became, hey, wait a minute, it's virtual. So why are we restricting it to Southeast? Let's just do Britain as whole, and then Europe and the world next. So we are in that UK phase, by the way, right now. And what that change meant, we went out to studios all across UK. So we've already done with 2K Hangar 13, who are based in the south of England. The next one we did at, and all these recordings, by the way, are available. I can share the links with everybody. Actually, sorry, they're not online yet. They will be very soon. And we had Sumo Digital, who's based in sort of mid-England. We've got quite a few other studios lined up or so, and exact same format. We get ethnic minority from the studio on the panel to talk about their journey, their life journey, and makes a tremendous difference to hear. And all these individuals are unsung heroes in the industry who nobody have ever heard of. So it's been incredibly successful, and we're going to carry on even past lockdowns and COVID or so in this format, because then we can reach out to far more wider audience and the world next. So that's all been going great. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about the UK industry, which will reflect, and I'll project that to the world. So in the UK video games industry, 40 years established right now, and we would say 40 years of video games development in Britain, but 30 years of industry established. Our very first trade body was set up 30 years ago last year. And believe it or not, and this is the state, and I don't think there's any much more across the world, but we did our very first credible survey of who's working in the video games industry in the UK last year. This was done by our trade body, UK, and in collaboration with the University of Sheffield, and we got a very credible sample size. Before then, the creative industry, this is film, TV, music combined, so a creative sector, funded some sort of industry, but it was roughly about 100 people in the video games industry take part in that survey, and you would have things like it's 4% ethnic minority. That just means 4 people said we are minority, and so that's never been a credible survey. So our industry, 30 years old, something which has been said 40 years ago in Britain, got the very first credible survey done of who actually works in the video games industry. We found it's 10% ethnic minority. Now, keep in mind, this is good promotions and was the first time ever. So you might have the figures slightly higher, or maybe not as well, because it didn't reach out to enough people. So it's not really a number business would want to entirely rely on. So basically, what I would say realistically happens with this is we are roughly about 7 years away from seeing what a credible industry this is in terms of numbers, who's working in there, and as it grows. Because the next year, sorry, I should say 8, yeah, it's roughly, sorry, if you carry out every 4 years surveys or so, but let's say you carry out every 2 years, which is what the plan is. So next year, when we're going to do the survey, you can have some correlation. And then 2 years after that, you can actually have some credible data where you can look at what the growths are and work on that and present that to businesses and saying you need to work harder because everybody else, this is the map of UK and then the world. Now, the world, as far as I know, IGDA is the only global organization I know who does surveys for global diversity and who's working in the industry. So it's literally the global census as such. So I don't have any figures on that right now, but this is where the state of, as far as I can see, the world is in terms of the industry itself. Now I'm going to focus a bit more on that. It is scary and it's crazy. So in the UK, in Europe, and in US as well, but I could definitely quantify this in the UK. For the last 3 years running, video games industry revenue is bigger than film, TV, and music industry combined. And that's a fact. And this is an industry which is making more revenue, but it's still considered, yeah, it's just video games. And we are in that phase. We are growing out of it. And that relates to diversity as well, because this is, again, something which we have found in Britain. I'm pretty certain it's exactly the same. And I hear it was very similar in the US as well. It is something we in the industry have to make this change, because nobody else will really go out and help us make this change until we become a credible industry at the level of TV, film, or so, where with fundings and things will start kicking in. So I'm going to end with my experience. I'll share this in terms of my anecdotal experience, which I always still find it funny, as opposed to it was quite a serious matter, because I was at the end of the day a victim of that. Was as at Sony, I used to visit development studios with engineers, and keep in mind, so at Sony, we were in charge of historic PAL region. So that effectively is anything which is not America's, North and South America, or Central America for that matter, and Japan. So every other region of the world, I was in charge of developer support and engineering for that. And I have to emphasize that it was never US or Europe and UK I've ever had this issue. So, but everywhere outside, including Eastern Europe and rest of the world, whenever we visit the studio, just because the way I looked, by the way, my roots are from India, and the hair is because of lack of haircut for 6 years. Usually, I have very pretty straight hair anyway. That shouldn't matter. Well, 6 years, 6 months. I haven't had a haircut for 6 months. So generally, everybody would assume I'm the junior person in the room, because all my engineers were white. And it was just one of those deduction people used to make, because if he's Indian, he must be the engineer. And everybody in my team got onto this sort of act. And I'm one of those, I would not correct somebody, because then, although it is usually hilarious, and never needed that sort of recognition. And my engineers would always jump in every opportunity they get, because they knew this was always going to happen. So sometimes there were some creative decisions and said, right, we'd like Sony to send a couple of engineers, and so gentleman X, who is usually a white person on the table, would he be able to arrange that for us? And he would put up a smile and just say, I'll have to ask my boss. He's just sitting there. He's Kish Hirani. You can ask him. And you see the faces of everybody. It's always sort of oops, and a sort of blood rushing to the face. And I'm sorry, we didn't know. I just find that very odd when people just said, I'm sorry, we didn't know. If you didn't know, why did you just assume then? And I think this is in every walk of life. People, if you're ethnic minority in certain situations or so, you end up, that people will always assume you are the junior in terms of, and I was in South Africa, by the way, last November. It was quite interesting, because in Britain and Europe and US, the minority are the minority in the industry, whereas in South Africa and pretty much maybe some parts of Africa itself, you've got something very different, where the majority are the minority in the industry. And it's quite a interesting. I would love to talk to more people about that. How do you handle that? It must be a very different experience. So I'm going to end there. Thank you.